So Frontier in Space is nearly a story of 2 parts. While it's a 6-parter, there are almost 2 different stories to it. The story itself is interesting, but it's a serial which is definitely held back by being 6 parts. So let's get into the plot and see how its length is its downfall. Now, despite my biggest problem with it, the serial begins in quite a strong position. We have a cargo ship heading to Earth which nearly crashes into the TARDIS, and is soon attacked by a warship belonging to Earth's greatest enemy, the Draconians. But from here the serial takes a bit of a turn for the worst, and begins a trend which the entire serial follows. That being, the Doctor and Jo are captured and thrown into a cell, something which happens continuously throughout the entire story. This is something near constant throughout the first half of the serial, and because of the frequent nature, I lost count of the exact number, although I think it's somewhere between 9 or a dozen times where the Doctor and Jo are captured, either together or separately. This really kills the pacing of the serial, with the first half of the serial being rather dull because of it. This is where the serial does somewhat differ considerably from Hulk's previous serials, as generally the first half of them tends to be the stronger bit. This serial does really pick up in its second half though, as there are less scenes of the two being captured, or at least they're less prominent. Episode 4 takes place mostly in the cell, but there's a lot going on so you don't think about it as much, as they're not being shuffled around all the time. The later episodes also have more elements of play, which makes them a funner watch, compared with the something is seriously wrong here and nobody believes us for the first half. So now I'll explain the conflict of the serial, and why the duo are being constantly put in prison. So the planets Earth and Draconia are currently at peace following a great war some decades ago. This has caused the 2 races to agree to a frontier in space to prevent any further conflict, with the villains of this serial trying to start a war by attacking ships while disguised as the opposing sides through some sort of brainwashing device. The Doctor and Jo are caught up in events and the TARDIS is taken away, with them believed to be spies. Now this is a cool concept for a serial, with there being a conspiracy element at play, but the problem is that it goes on for far too long. There are so many scenes dedicated to the duo finding out they are not believed by anyone, and every attempt to get the truth out of them fails, yet nobody changes their minds about them. This really hurts the characters and the story itself, as while yes they wouldn't all change their minds immediately, nobody does, which makes it feel like nothing could ever change their minds, which is something the serial does rely on later. This all ends with the Doctor being sent to a special prison on the moon, with him being in prison for the rest of his life. But that doesn't last long, as he's freed in the beginning of the next episode, and the setup for his freeing is only a few scenes after he's been sent there. And this is where we're introduced to the man behind all the attacks on the 2 factions, the Master. So yes, the Master has returned again, with him stirring up trouble as usual. But unlike with Hulk's previous scripts, the Master's presence doesn't hurt the serial, but instead is a lot stronger for it. While it's not perfect, the script feels stronger than the previous 2 Malcolm Hulk Master scripts, and I think that's because he's far better integrated into the events. It's not a lesser version of the Silurians, or he shows up at the end of an interesting idea. Instead he's calling the shot from the start. We have him working with the Ogrons, which gives us some comedy, which feels quite natural and doesn't hinder the tension like it has on other occasions, and so the threat feels stronger than it did in the Sea Devils. Beyond that, the Master being this potentially galaxy-wide threat instead of just trying to wipe out humanity from Earth puts him in a far more interesting position than we've seen him in before. The serial also lacks the scene of the Doctor and the Master working together, which was becoming overused in the past 2 seasons, and I think it strengthens the Master as a villain, as he isn't being forced into a position which makes it clear he didn't think things through. But on the other hand, the serial does have several scenes which makes it clear that the Master isn't the top dog, as while he is in command of the Ogrons, we do get hints that someone else is pulling the strings, and this is the serial's final twist, as we get the Master working with another of the Doctor's oldest enemies.
I brought some old friends along to meet you.
The Master and the Daleks working together is such a big twist, as these are the Doctor's greatest foes. The Daleks are of course using the Master and he's using them, but due to the Doctor's victory it means that neither gets to overthrow the other before the other betrays them. There isn't much of a chance for a dynamic between them face to face, as the Daleks are also here as a tease rather than the main threat. But what we do get is fun, as the Daleks are fully prepared to kill the Doctor for the first time ever, and the Master tells them to wait so the Doctor can watch the universe burn. This saves the Doctor's life and will backfire in both their faces. So the Daleks should have probably just killed him there and then. I mean, it was the only time they were ever going to, so... I do wonder if the Master had planned to use the Doctor against the Daleks later, but this never gets a chance to happen. Although it does seem possible, as by keeping him prisoner, he would both have his knowledge of the Daleks to use, and just having him around would probably have an effect on the Daleks' plans in the long term. So let's talk about the characters. I want to discuss the Draconians first, as I haven't really talked about them. Within the serial, they are just as much in the wrong as humanity, with neither side believing the Doctor and both taking him prisoner to find out what he knows, just so they can not believe it. There is only one prominent Draconian, and that's the Prince, who is also the ambassador to Earth. Throughout the first half, he is the one who has to deal with the President of Earth, and her accusations that his people are violating the frontier, with him taking a very dim view of her because of it. Throughout this half, he is an enemy, but by the second he is willing to work with the Doctor after he has met with the Emperor. He is a noble warrior, and his desire to stick to the ways of his people does make him a bit stuck in the past, with him being the one to enforce the rules and traditions of his people, while the Doctor is speaking with the Emperor, with the most notable moment when saying that women are not allowed to speak, something the Emperor allows due to his respect for other customs. This does make him interesting, but he is somewhat limited due to the structure of the serial, having him secondary to a lot of the events in the first half, although his dynamic with General Williams is his most interesting due to their history. While we don't have a direct history, it was General Williams who was responsible for the first act of aggression which began the original war, with him launching the first strike on a Draconian ship. This was due to a misunderstanding as he saw them acting aggressively due to them not responding to his hails, but in fact their communication unit wasn't functioning. Having these two confront each other about this and finally put their issues aside is a great scene, and having them work together to hunt down the Master really sells this, even though there isn't a scene where the two of them and them alone work together. Now let's talk about General Williams, as I've just talked about Wyfer's dynamics. Williams is the standard military idiot who doesn't listen to the truth and constantly makes the situation worse. Throughout, Williams is one of the biggest hurdles, and in the first half is basically the main villain until the Master's introduction. He isn't the most compelling of characters unfortunately, as outside of his late change of heart, and learning the truth of how he started the war, he's quite flat, and basically just a wall that the Doctor can't get past. He does have a relationship with the President, and is often put in a position where he has to choose between her and making his own action, with him basically pushing her to make decisions by saying that he could declare martial law. This dynamic causing him some hesitance is somewhat against the typical military character that he is, so that gives him some depth. The President, on the other hand, is quite a simple character, but has her interesting aspects. While she does stand against the truth alongside the General, she does think that the Doctor is the worst of the two, and thinks that Jo can be made to speak the truth in time. I have talked about her dynamic with the General, which does make her interesting, as she is being forced to make decisions and not wanting to go against her friend at the same time, although she is more restrained than he is. The most interesting thing about her is definitely the fact that she is a female President of Earth, which at the time of broadcast there hadn't even been a female Prime Minister, so this was both a radical and forward-thinking decision. This was a decision made by Terrance Dicks, who has talked to write the President as female, with him making the decision to state that she was not the first. Now for the Master, who feels a lot stronger here than he has in a while. The past few Master serials have either overused him or forced him into another unique idea, which is taken away from it. This serial, however, puts the Master in a position which suits him. It's a lot like the final few parts of Colony in Space, where he's in disguise as someone of importance, but here it's built into the main structure of the story, and so his arrival doesn't hinder the plot, instead helps it. Beyond that, his presence is restrained in the first half, and so doesn't hog screen time from the other elements. Throughout he feels powerful and in control. The only time this isn't the case is where he's captured by the Draconians, and he still manages to keep the playing field somewhat level until the Doctor makes a move which changes everything. His admittedly limited dynamic with the Daleks is also interesting, with it hinting towards another potentially interesting story. This feels like the first time in a while when I wasn't annoyed by the Master's presence, and instead was embracing him as being a part of the story and awaiting what he'll do next. Delgado himself at this point was a bit annoyed with how attached the Doctor to who he had become, as he wasn't getting offered other jobs due to people believing he was a main cast member, which is clearly related to how overused he was in Season 8. Because of this, it was decided that he would appear in one more serial titled The Final Game, which would write him out, but sadly this would not come to pass. This would end up being Delgado's last appearance as the Master, as he would tragically pass away later the same year due to a car crash while he was filming in Turkey. His untimely death would take its toll on many of the people around him, with the show ultimately retiring the Master for a few years because of it, and even Pertwee's departure was somewhat connected with this due to how good friends they were. But this is something we'll end up talking about in full when we reach his final serial. Now let's talk about Jo, who is very strong here. Although the serial does keep her a hostage or prisoner for basically the entire thing, she gets plenty of scenes where she shines. Throughout she is either making plans to escape or playing a major role in the escapes. From their second imprisonment she's immediately making plans to escape, but does overlook things in the excitement, notably that the TARDIS is gone. Then in her penultimate imprisonment she escapes and thinks that she's alerting the universe to the Master's plans, but this was ultimately a part of his plan. This does mean that she's showing a lot of initiative, even if it usually goes wrong. But what I think is her best scene is where she beats the Master at his hypnotism. So the Master attempts to hypnotise Jo, but she is able to resist it, showing that she has prepared herself for it after the last time it occurred, which is great development for her. It's so satisfying to see him unable to contend with her, with him physically throwing up his hands to stop her and having to alter his plans because of it. That's sort of it for her in the serial. She is limited in what she is able to do, but is constantly trying to do something, with her getting a major win against the Master. But one big thing to note is that she reveals something of importance. While pretending to be speaking with the Doctor, she says that she asked her uncle at the United Nations to get her a job at UNIT. This explains how someone so unqualified was able to get into UNIT. And it's a great reveal, as across her time on the show, she's gone from the unqualified girl to a much stronger and braver woman, who's able to stand on her own. And this reveal is important going forwards in this season. So finally we have the Doctor, who gets to do a lot. While he does also suffer from the being stuck in the prison problem, he also gets moved around a lot more, with him even being sent to a specialist prison on the moon, for about half an episode before leaving on his first day. The prison scenes are definitely quite weak, as there isn't much going on, although a good moment is when he's talking about lie detectors in this era, and talks about how easily they are to be fooled by just telling the truth, before telling a story about when he told one something so preposterous it blew up, although what he said was true. Plus seeing him facing off against one of these machines and proving that the people operating it are in fact the useless ones is just a perfect third Doctor moment. There aren't really any moments between him and the Master due to the structure, but that is made up for by other notable moments. We of course have a scene with the Draconian Emperor, where we learn about his history with their people and that he is a noble of their planet. He doesn't state which incarnation was the one to become a nobleman, and this is left up to interpretation, but I feel like this was more a first Doctor thing. There are also several spacewalks, which allows for him to show off this skill which we haven't really seen before. But perhaps his best scene is one of the last, when he uses the device that the Master is using to disguise the Ogrons to pretend to be a Dalek to cause force their guard to let them go. There are strong moments for the Doctor in this serial, but the constant imprisonment really drains this out of a long-term memory, which really hurts a pretty good story. Behind the scenes there are a few things, and the first thing to talk about is how this serial came to be, which links directly to the next serial. So originally the production team wanted to do a 12-part Dalek serial, but due to them knowing how much stress the Daleks master plan had put on Douglas Camfield, and over the course of 3 months the viewing figures had suffered dramatically, they decided against this and instead went for 2 serials that are connected. This led to Frontier in Space sort of being a first part to a much larger story, with the Daleks appearing as a tease for their next adventure. The plotline of the Master wanting to start a war is directly connected, as the Daleks want to cause this war so that they will be able to launch an attack on the entire universe with their own army of Daleks. But we'll talk more about that in the next serial. But it does mean that some of the events of this serial aren't wrapped up and rely on the quality of the next serial. The next thing is the Cybermen. I know that may seem odd, but Hulk originally wanted to use the Cybermen, although this was changed, partly due to the production team wanting to reuse the Ogrons as the costumes were still available, which, given that the Daleks are a big part of this grander plot, does work better than the Cybermen playing second fiddle to them. If it had occurred though, this would have seen the Master and the Cybermen work together for the first time, but this dynamic would resurface later, with this pairing becoming a very common one in the show's future. Another thing to note is the sonic screwdriver prop, which has changed considerably since the previous serial, which is weird given that this is meant to take place right after that one. Now why this change happened is a bit confusing, as I've heard 2 separate stories. The one that I've become more accustomed to is that the original prop was lost, so a new one was made, but I've recently become aware of another story, in which this is the same prop, but the production team just decided to change it, for no good reason. While we're on props, I also want to address the use of several Century 21 spaceships. Century 21 was Jerry Anderson's production company, and like with the sonic screwdriver prop, several props and pieces of set would make their way to Doctor Who's production office, which apparently included the Thunderbirds themselves, although the production team thought they would be too recognisable to use. Speaking of props, the last bit is a piece of costuming, which is the helmet for the Doctor's spacesuit, which had appeared in the show before, as it was used in both Mission to the Unknown and Dalek's Master Plan as the helmet for one of the delegates. The actor of which appeared in the last Dalek serial. How interesting. And the final thing I want to talk about is the gun sound effects, because they sound very odd and stupid. While there seems to be a variety, there is one scene specifically where it sounds like someone is making the sound with their mouth. Even if it's not someone doing that, they sound so strange, and I just always end up laughing whenever I watch the scene. It's definitely a highlight of the serial. So that's Frontier in Space, a serial with a horrible pacing issue, but does pick up in the second half, when the Master arrives. For as much as I complain that the Master has been overused, he works well in this serial, although sadly it's far from the best story for him to have gone out on, feeling more like a taste of something bigger. Despite having the main characters in cells for the majority of it, it still gives them the opportunity to shine, with Joe notably getting a big moment against the Master. But at the same time, the serial does feel like a part 1, and as I've explained before, it is, as the next serial ties directly into it, with this serial ending on a cliffhanger, making it feel like an early Hartnell story. So we'll just have to see if the second part is weaker or stronger, and if its decisions can make up for this one's shortcomings. So the Daleks heading off to awaken their army, the Doctor and Joe follow them to their new base, and will face an army of Daleks larger than any seen before. Next time, Planet of the Daleks.